Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. With me today, I've got Richard Willis of the National Asphalt Pavement Association. Richard, say hello.
Hi, how are y'all doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for making time today. So what we were interested in talking about with you today, Richard, is, first I'd like to give folks just a little bit of a background on sort of, kind of your resume and the work that you've done in the past, and then also maybe a minute on some of the things that you do, generally speaking, at NAPA. And then I'd like to get into a little bit more about sort of the Future of Roadways conversation that you and I have had before, and that we wanted to talk about today. So first off, could you give us just a little bit of background on sort of your resume and the work that you've done in the past, and then the work that you do today at NAPA?
Absolutely. So right now I serve as the Vice President for Engineering, Research, and Technology for the National Asphalt Pavement Association, or NAPA. Before I came to NAPA, I was a research professor at Auburn University in the National Center for Asphalt Technology. And so I was there for about 7 or 8 years. And while I was in that position, I focused a lot on the use of sustainable or recycled materials and asphalt mixtures, and trying to ensure that we were reusing materials properly and still getting great performance out of that. I did some research into warm mix and really developing more sustainable infrastructure. My background in terms of some of my early research was in developing new methods for doing pavement design to ensure that we're not over-designing our pavements. We're really optimizing that pavement structure to build it as thin as possible and get as much performance out of it as possible. Today, I manage the engineering team at NAPA, which includes basic engineering, plan operations, paver operations. We've got a research and technology arm where we're constantly looking at new research that's being conducted, not just across the US, but really across the world, and trying to figure out what's really coming and how do we implement this, and what's going to be most advantageous, not just for us as an industry, but for our customers, to ensure that we're getting better performance. And we also have the sustainability component. We've got a director of sustainable pavements on our team that's looking at things like life cycle assessment and how do we ensure that we're trying to do as much for the environment and society as we can through our pavement structures.
Gotcha. Okay, that's excellent. Well, then that kind of segues pretty naturally into the topic that we wanted to talk about today, which is just the future of roadways and what role NAPA is playing in sort of the advent and the coming of autonomous vehicles and new technologies and new sensors and things in pavements. And so what you and I had talked a little bit about is, today, so many of the companies that are developing autonomous vehicle technologies, whether it's Apple or Google or Tesla or Uber or any of these guys, they are kind of leading the charge right now in terms of how highways are going to change in terms of the way that that the public uses highways. We were thinking that as a pavement industry, it would be important for us to be part of that conversation, because we understand how pavements are designed and built and used and maintained. That's our expertise. And so I was pretty excited when I heard that NAPA is very actively concerned about that and is getting involved in that, in helping steer sort of that national conversation of what the future of roadways needs to look like in terms of design and construction and maintenance and use, and topics that you talked about like sustainability and resiliency and all those things kind of come together. So I was really hoping that could kind of be what we talk about in this conversation, is just to learn more about what NAPA is looking at, what trends NAPA sees, what things NAPA is getting involved in. So so I would say take it away, and we'd love to hear what NAPA is involved in these days.
So I've been at NAPA for about 3 years now, and specifically for at least the last 2.5, really looking at what people might classify as some of these disruptive technologies, like the connected autonomous vehicles, has been something we've been trying to do a lot of just education on with our members over the last couple annual meetings, and that's where majority of our membership together, a lot of the high level CEOs and COOs of our companies come and expect to hear about how different things are coming that are going to impact the industry. And autonomous vehicles have been definitely something that we've tried to highlight in many of these meetings to understand how is this technology progressing, where is it going, what's the conversation look like. And so we've been a part of the education front to the asphalt industry to try to make sure they understand what might the future look like on almost a yearly basis. Additionally, besides just education, we've been trying to take part in a lot of these national conversations, and some of the times it's difficult. As you said, it's Google's and Tesla's and those companies that are trying to lead this, and they don't actively engage a lot of the pavement community in those conversations. They're just like, well, just keep doing what you're doing and we'll figure things out. And that can present a challenge, especially in this is where we live in, where I don't know if they understand that every time they cross the state line, specifications change, pavements are designed and built differently. Right. And a vehicle is not necessarily going to know that it crossed the state line unless it's got that accurate GPS system with maps and stuff built in, but it's not going to know the specs and standards that that road was built to. And so there needs to be a national conversation with not just the pavement industry, but with DOTs and FHWA, because we're the ones responsible for ensuring that these vehicles are going to be able to operate as they cross borders, as they cross jurisdictions.
Exactly.
And I think it's going to be a little bit more complicated than they think.
Yes.
And so we've been a part of a few of the national conversations. Last year, FHWA held 5, and I think they called them kind of conversations related to connected and autonomous vehicles. Everything related, there were 5 different topics, but we were definitely there in November for a conversation on infrastructure and looking at the infrastructure needs and how it was going to impact. And even that focused a lot on things like sensors and GPS as infrastructure and not as much on the heavy highway kind of built infrastructure. But one of the things we're trying to do is even when we're not necessarily an active vocal part of a conversation, we're trying to be at the meetings where these things are being discussed. We attended many of the Future of the Highways meetings with the TRB committee that was developed. TS Americas is happening in Washington, D.C. as we record this webinar. And our staff was down there yesterday trying to understand, well, what are people talking about? So we can then digest what people are thinking and then come back to them with potential solutions or potential gaps and things that they're not thinking about. Right. I think that's the big role that we can play is hey, have you thought about this? Or have you really gone down this avenue to understand how it's going to impact you?
So if it's possible to get into some of those details, I think that would be really helpful for the audience. So let's backtrack just a little bit. You started about how NAPA has been doing a lot of educational events to be able to educate your membership and just the industry in general about what's coming and what NAPA sees. Are there? I'm curious to hear sort of what people's reactions are. From the audience. Are people skeptical? Are they embracing it? Because one of the things that we often see is, when we talk to Uber and Tesla and Apple and those guys, exactly what you're saying, that they say, you guys just keep doing what you're doing and we'll follow along. And, and there's so many times we have asked them, who on their staff is looking at sort of the future of roadways and the future of highways and what changes they would like to see in terms of the ways highways are designed and built. And then they always come back with the same answer, that they're not looking at that at all. They are just interested in figuring out how to read the pavement as it is today and understand how it is today, which on one hand makes sense, but at the same time, you also don't really get the truth out of these private companies of what they're really up to, because there's just a discrepancy between all the buzz and the marketing that level 5 autonomy is going to be out in 2019 or 2020. But but a lot of that is not necessarily true. So it's a tricky thing with the private companies because on the one hand they say you just keep doing what you're doing, but the reality is they are absolutely steering where this is going if the paving industry and the engineers who actually are the ones who design and build this don't get more involved. And so as NAPA goes around trying to educate the audience, can you tell me a little bit about either some of the key points that NAPA is trying to make to the audiences, and maybe what some of the reactions that you get from the audience are like?
So some of the things that we're stressing is that right now where things are moving slow, or things are moving forward, but they aren't necessarily moving forward as fast as some people expect.
Right.
The challenge really for the paving industry is going to be, for at least the next, I don't know how many, 10, 15 years, you're going to have mixed mode cars out there where you're going to have some people driving, you're going to have some people in autonomous vehicles, and we have to develop our infrastructure in a way that's compatible with both sets of vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
When you're designing everything for humans or designing everything for machines, it simplifies the process.
Right.
Because you know your audience. But when that audience is changing and morphing over time, we've got a major transition period. I mean, let's be honest, right now there are 280 million cars in the US, and the majority of those people are still behind the wheel, and they're going to be behind the wheel for a while.
Right. And so
however,
is NAPA expecting to eventually see like dedicated autonomous lanes or dedicated platoon truck lanes, that sort of thing?
Well, I know that there's been a push for what people call the critical commerce corridors, and to me that makes a lot of sense for people to look at platooning in that type of area where you get some of the heavy vehicles off of the main highways, you put them on where they can go from location to location where they're delivering freight and goods in a rapid platoon manner. It's a safety help as well,
right?
Because a lot of times it's the interaction of some of the heavy vehicles and passenger cars that can create some of the challenges with driving. But it also, I think that presents an opportunity for platooning very easily.
Right.
If you were to develop those. Now, we might have to design the roads a little bit different. We're not sure. We might have to use a few different types of mixes as we develop those roads. But I think one of the things that we're missing by not having an active part of this conversation with some of the people developing, like the autonomous truck fleets, is, ultimately, the pavements and the trucks and the vehicles have to work together. And I think they're doing research to try to optimize their efforts, and we're doing research to try to optimize the pavement. But who's to say those two things aren't helping each other?
Right.
And there's probably a sweet spot where, in reality, we can find a place where the trucks are getting the best fuel efficiency while we're doing the least damage to the pavements as possible, which will help them out because we're not going to have to go out and do maintenance rehabilitation as often. And if we were working together to kind of find some of that optimized area or that common ground, I think it would be beneficial for not just the roadway network owners, but fleet operations, for those companies doing freight movements. And some of that research is even being conducted right now through a university transportation center at the University of Illinois. Dr. Ahmad Al-Qadi is leading some of that effort, and he actually came and presented at our annual meeting last year to our Committee on Research and Technology, on Asphalt Research and Technology, or CART, to try to help the industry understand that there are a lot of people out there proclaiming doom and gloom on asphalt because they still envision the West Track ruts with the channelized traffic. But let's be honest, we're not designing mixes or pavement structures that way anymore. We've got mixtures that are designed to handle heavy loads. And if we work with the trucking industry, we can find that area where we can still provide that smooth road that they're used to with asphalt and get great performance out of it and maximize their fuel economy.
Right.
So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So one of the things that we've been trying to tell people is that's the question we hear the most when it comes to channelized traffic is, well, how's an asphalt going to handle it? And I was like, well, we can design a mix to last.
Right.
It may mean we modify it a little bit differently, we get a little bit different aggregate structure, but using some of the technologies and methodologies like balanced design, using some of our new materials that are being put into pavements, we can make it happen. It doesn't have to be that negative denotation that a lot of people say. I see positive things that can come.
Right, exactly. All right, so then that leads me to the question of, is it easy to articulate sort of what things NAPA wants to see happen in the industry? Meaning, what are the areas, like you were talking about how there is a bit of a gap between what the Daimler Trucks North America and the different auto manufacturers are doing in terms of the technology that they develop, and then we're doing research over here in pavement and engineering and materials. But there seems to be kind of a gap that those two are not communicating and working together well enough. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. And so is that kind of a major push of what NAPA, that's like a direction that NAPA is trying to get the industry to go to, is try to bring these two parts together?
Well, I think that's something that we're trying to figure out the best way to do that.
Okay.
And some of the ways to do that may be through some of the equipment manufacturers that are, I mean, let's be honest, most of our equipment manufacturers are looking at developing autonomous rollers and using a lot of the similar technologies as people are developing for autonomous vehicles, and using them to kind of that gap might be the way to kind of enter that conversation.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, that's great. Are there other things that NAPA is, trying to direct the industry's attention to, that NAPA sees that these are the important things that, maybe we're not paying enough attention to, that we need to put more focus on?
Are you specifically talking about like connected and autonomous vehicles, or kind of in general things that the industry needs to direct more focus on?
Let's cover both, actually. Yeah. So in terms of connected autonomous vehicles, future of roadways kind of stuff, is NAPA's number one interest in trying to get these different parts of the industry communicating and working together better, or are there also other things, or is that kind of the big one?
So I would say that's one of the major focuses of our Committee on Asphalt Research and Technology. They highlighted 2 or 3 major things that they wanted to focus on, and in staying involved in the couple major research studies that are being conducted on the impacts of CAV on asphalt pavements and performance was one of those things. And it'll be one of the discussions that we'll be having at our mid-year meeting in Asheville, North Carolina, is how do we bridge this gap,
right? And
kind of developing that strategy. But if we're honest, there are numerous other things that we're focused on as an industry and trying to make sure that we're continuing to advance. And one of the biggest ones is, how do we get the workforce needs? And how do we recruit and get and retain people for our industry?
Sure.
If our current chairman is John Harper, and that's his big platform for this year. In fact, NAPA has just created its own standing workforce development committee, where we're looking at how do we communicate with the younger generation that the asphalt industry is a place where you can make a great living and make a career, and it'd be good for you. How do we develop partnerships with people like FHWA and some of those other organizations that are focused on workforce to leverage what we're all doing? And also, how do we then, once we get people into the industry, deliver on the promise that we make that you can have a great career?
Right.
And so, workforce is one of our top priorities right now as an organization. But I see the same things we're talking about with connected and autonomous vehicles, and that change in technology. I think that's something that we can use to highlight, to recruit people in. It may be in 5 to 10 years, someone's operating a roller from an iPad, like a video game, on the side of the road, instead of up on top of it. I think that those changes in technology can make it attractive and help connect with some of that younger generation.
Absolutely. Are
And
there?
we're also focused on durability of mixes for pavement performance, because right now that's one of the things that our customers, the DOTs and agencies, are really focused on, and we're trying to do everything we can to deliver that through different material choices, design methodologies, whatever we can do.
Right, right. That's great. All right, we are about out of time. I've got two just quick questions, if we could, on the workforce development topic. I mean, you're right. That is absolutely, possibly the biggest issue in the construction industry right now. Are there any specific ideas that we could give to the audience today in terms of, specific ideas that NAPA sees as as possible tactics that could help that could help with the workforce shortage issue that so many people in our industry are facing?
I'll be honest. Right now, we're in a massive information gathering mode.
Okay.
We're conducting market research, looking at different generations, different types of people, going in and even looking at educators and how do we communicate with educators so they can help steer people through the industry. The thing that I've seen that some companies do really well is they get active in their community and they get active in the education process. They go into education to elementary schools and teach people about the rock cycle. And I was in my kids' elementary school a few weeks ago teaching them about, well, what do engineers do? We help solve problems, and talking about how porous pavements and OGFCs were a solution to a problem that some people were having. And really just staying in front of people. Being active in your community and having that good relationship with your community where they know that you care, they know that you're interested. I think that that's one of the first steps, ensuring that they know you're an option, and they could be proud to be a part of that. And then in 2020, we'll be rolling out kind of all the things that we've learned over this past year through our market research and teaching people, here's how you communicate to the different generations. Here's how we can develop these messages. And really at that point, we'll be a lot more active in helping provide solutions, but we don't want to get out ahead of ourselves. We want to make sure that we do a methodical process so that we can not just develop a short-term solution for this, we can develop a long-term plan that continually can feed into our companies to help them with workforce. Gotcha. That makes sense. All right. That's great. Well, we're out of time for today. Richard, it's been terrific. It's been very educational. We appreciate your time very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.